Hello, well, welcome to our very small panel. I know we don't need to have these microphones. Anyway, so no, we're going to just talk about some toys, Boglins Sectaurs, the comeback of these things. It's kind of cool. So, I know your story. I don't know if these folks know your story, though, Tim. So how did you get into doing sculpting and creating toys?
When I was a kid, I did puppet shows for the kids in my neighborhood to make money. And then when I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, I was majoring in art education, and I wanted to take Kermit Love, who designed Big Bird and Snuffleupagus, was teaching a class there on puppetry. And I tried to get into his class every semester. And it was pretty much, preference was given to graduating seniors and theater majors. So I didn't get into his class until the last semester of my senior year. And I was just determined to outdo everybody in the class. So, like a lot of people were just making puppets, very Muppet style. And the first puppet I made was a crab, and I put extensions on each one of my fingers. And then I made a hard shell out of plaster bandage. And then my thumbs were its eyes. So I took it out and I had it crawl across the table, and Kermit just looked at me and goes, "That's really cool. That's really very neat what you're doing." He said, "I'm so glad you're not doing this. That you're thinking about using your hands in a different way." So then I think, I'm trying to remember the order of what I made. The next thing I did was a dragon, and my right hand was its head. And then my head was the hump in its back. And the tail was at the opposite end. And, so it moved like this, rather than like out front. He said, "Tim, this is really cool." And when I was in high school, I decided I wanted to learn how to design my own shirts. And my mother used to make clothes for my sister all the time. And I said to her, "Look, I want you to teach me how to sew." And she said, "Yeah, okay, fine, I will," which back in that day and age was very unusual. So I started making my own shirts that I used to wear to school. And people would always ask me, "Where did you get that shirt?" And I said, "Well, I made it." I'm like, "You made it?" So then when I did the dragon, it was all like quilted, like the spikes were all quilted on his back and everything. And Kermit said, "So who sewed this?" And I said, "I did." He goes, "You know how to sew too?" I said, "Yes." And so then towards the end of the semester, he said to me, "What are you doing after you graduated?" I said, "Well, I'm looking for a teaching job." But I was at the tail end of the baby boom generation, and the next generation, they were closing schools because the population had declined. And I said, "Well, I'm looking for a teaching job, but there's nothing out there." And he said, "Well, what would you think about coming and working for me?" And I said, "Great, I'm happy to, And Kermit had made his name designing and building costumes for ballet companies, primarily New York City Ballet, and working with Balanchine, that was really cool. So one of the projects we did was to restore the marionette of the giant. In Don Quixote, the windmill changes into a giant, and it was a series of plywood that was hinged, and it went completely flat to the floor. And then it was marionetted up into the rafters with this heavy black line. And so all of a sudden, the windmill changed to this giant swinging a mace across the stage, trying to hit the performers. And it was the only time I went to a ballet where a set piece got applause. Like the ballet stopped, because this thing literally you didn't know it because like most of the people in the audience were below the stage level, so they couldn't see this thing flat on the floor. All of a sudden it just like sprung up and came alive, and like the whole audience just stopped and applauded, and then the dancers weren't sure what to do. You know, like they were like well, what do we do? Do we stop the ballet? Because like everybody was applauding with it, and then they got into it. You know, they had this whole battle with the giant. But it was amazing going to sitting in the when we were practicing the use of the marionette, and there was a woman who would sit next to Balanchine, and she would direct all the dancers. And Kermit turned to me and he said, "You see that woman who's working with George?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "She has memorized every single one of his ballets. She has no book, nothing. She has memorized each dancer's movement at each time in the ballet. And she tells every time they perform a new ballet or something, she recalls the entire sequence of every dancer in the book." And he said, George could not function without that woman. And I would like, then when I would watch the ballets after that, I go like, how the hell does she do that? I mean, you know, just such an amazing ability to recall. So then we did the recreation of Picasso's costumes, Cubist costumes for Joffrey Ballet, and we did stuff for Twyla Tharp. Kermit was Twyla Tharp's main costume designer. And then we would do a TV commercial for a puppet, you know, with a puppet, and then we would do, we did characters for Sesame Street in Kuwait, and then Sesame Street in Germany, and Sesame Street in Mexico. So they would replace basically the Big Bird, Oscar the Grouch characters with new characters for each country.
Different iteration.
And then they would dub the other puppet sections. So then after doing that for a year, Kermit, like through the summer, didn't have any work, and I wasn't making a lot of money, and I said, you know, I'm going to go ask him if I can go for an interview at Henson, you know, with Jim. And I went to Pratt because he was teaching that day, and I waited till his class finished, and as I walked in, he said to me, "Tim, I'm so glad you came in today." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Jim's starting up this new project at the New York office, and I want you to go up and interview." And I was like, it was so weird. I was like, oh my God, he's like reading my mind now. And so I took all the puppets I had been making when I was at college, and then the puppets I had made in the downtime at Kermit's studio. One of which was, I have the photos on my desk, was a sea anemone puppet. And those actually became the big orange creatures that roll around in dark crystal on the cliffs as Jen is climbing through it. It's one of the only things in the movie that Brian didn't design. And I went in, you know, it's like I didn't know what to put all these puppets I had in. So I just stuffed them in garbage bags. And I get on the subway and I go in, and you know, it's like I ring the bell, and I go up to the 4th floor in the Muppet workshop, and I said, you know, I'm here to meet with Jim, and they said, okay, just wait over there, he'll be here in a little while. And he walked in, and then I just started pulling all these things out of the garbage bags, and you know, he said the same thing basically that Kermit said. He said, we're doing a totally new movie. It is not going to be anything that looks like a Muppet. And he said, I really like the fact that you're using your whole body for things, and that you are thinking about using your hands in ways that are not the usual form of Muppet characters. And then he said to me, okay, when do you want to start? And I said, tomorrow. And he said, no, I have to talk to HR. Why don't you come back next Tuesday? And I said, okay, fine. So, and then it was just like this, you know, it's like when I think back about it now, it's like it was such a unusual experience because we were just testing out different materials, different fabrics, different types of foam. Dick Smith, who had done the makeup for Exorcist on Linda Blair, and who had done Raging Bull, and like everybody in the makeup industry knows who he is. And Jim hired him to come in and teach us how to use foam latex to build the creatures for Dark Crystal. And it was really cool because Dick Smith learned from us in a way, because he said, it's like, I've always been applying these things to people's faces. You're making these whole creatures, and the movement you can get with your hands is so much greater than what you can just get from somebody's jaw. And he said, this is such a great idea, the approach you guys are taking. So it was this wonderful give and take. And I have to say, Dick Smith, until Dick Smith came along, the process of making foam latex was kept secret by the special effects guys who did special effects makeup. It was a very small group of people who knew how to make foam latex. And all the guys in California, they never told anybody. Like, if you got to work for them, then you would learn the process, and you were expected to keep it secret. Mm-hmm. And Dick broke down that barrier, because he said, it's like, if we keep doing this, it's gonna be the end of our own industry, Yeah. So he was the first one who was really going out and teaching, and I just learned such amazing things from him, like the whole approach of how you sculpt and all that stuff. And then I started making, the first Mystic was just a hand-carved block of foam that was then covered with latex. But we knew we couldn't do it that way because we couldn't make repetitions of the same thing over and over and over again that would be accurate. So that's why foam latex was done. And then Miss Piggy ended up being done out of foam latex because, to get somebody to recarve that each time out of a block of foam was extremely difficult. So Miss Piggy was done, and Statler and Waldorf were done out of foam latex, and who else? I don't think I guess Gonzo? Swedish Chef was. No, Gonzo was always remained hand carved. And that may have just been, like, Frank always preferred the hand carved Piggy to the latex one. He said the hand carved one was much easier to manipulate, and that may have just been Dave's preference. Yes. And maybe he got away with it because they didn't have to use Gonzo as much as the other.
But I mean, you certainly see that with Piggy and her movement. Like, you look at the early Muppet Show, because the nose is definitely longer. Yes. Now, and you see that movement, but then it's almost like a stiffness to Piggy. Yeah. Up to today, I'm assuming they probably still do it the same way. For Piggy.
Yeah. Now it's fun. It's always fun.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah. Quick word.
Oh, sorry. What? The Halloween ones in the black boxes.
So it's behind the scenes convention stuff.
Those are prototypes, and those are the only ones I have. Tell them they'll be available in August. Online at Boglins.
And the other ones are?
He can pre-order them now if he wants.
What's the first number?
The blue ones, plain one, are 40.
Okay, it's got to be purchased for me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
thank you.
Great.
Sorry.
Showbiz.
So, let's see.
You're talking about the carvings of Piggy and stuff.
Yeah, so then it was just a lot of exploration with materials, and then after 9 months of working in New York and testing out all these different things, they said, Jim was trying to get the Dark Crystal produced in California, and he couldn't get any studios to put up money for it. And then Lou Grade said, to him, Jim, I'll tell you what, you can do this crazy fantasy movie if you want, but you have to do another Muppet movie for me first. So they sent us to the UK, And we worked on Dark Crystal until we started production for Great Muppet Caper, and then we worked on that, and then we went back to working on Dark Crystal. And yeah, it was just 2.5 years of my life, which I didn't know was unusual. You know, it's like, because it was the first movie I ever worked on, and it wasn't until I went to DragonCon, when was it, 3 years ago, and Charlie Chiodo, who did Critters and Killer Clowns from Outer Space, was sitting on one side of me, and Nick Maley, who did Yoda with Stuart Freeborn, was sitting on the other, and they were talking about their experience doing special effects stuff. And then Charlie Chiodo turns to me and goes, and then these bastards, and he points to me and goes, did Dark Crystal. He said, after that, every producer would say to us, we want these creatures to look just like Dark Crystal. And Charlie said, we had to explain to like all the production teams after that, like, you don't understand. Jim has a dedicated workshop of guys who work year round, full time on this stuff. We can't do that in 3 months. You know, it's like, it just cannot be done. We'll do the best we can. And he said it made our lives living hell, because like they would go, well, why doesn't its eyes move, and why doesn't its neck twitch, and you know, like, why doesn't it, you know, like have bladders in its throat so it looks like it's breathing, you know, like all this crazy stuff we were doing, you know. So, and since I started basically working for Muppets out of college, and I was in New York until I went to the UK. I had no experience in film industry before that, so I didn't know what the expectations were. And so, you know, working at Muppets was this incredible luxury. I mean, literally, because we had dedicated shoppers. I didn't even have to shop for things. I would just go through a catalog, write down what I wanted, and then somebody would go out, and the next day would be on my desk. And you know, it was like, it was just amazing. And so you got to play with all, you know, like if you had an idea, and even when it came to writing Dark Crystal, Jim, in the early days of the film production, would have the whole crew in on the script meetings. And he said to us, look, if you guys have a good idea that you want to contribute, you know, don't hesitate, because I'm open to hearing, you know, whatever you think will work. So we got through certain parts of the movie, and then Jim said, and then at the end, the Skeksis and the Mystics get melded back into the crystal, and then Jen is healed, and I mean, Kira is healed, and Jen, you know, is like, realizes that she's back to life. And I said, no, but Jim, they were originally one character. We should have that character come out of the crystal as, you know, having been divided and now back whole, and they're the ones that bring about the healing of Kira. And he looked at me and goes, Tim, that's a great idea. We're going to do that. And then I was really pissed afterwards, because they let Lyle Conway do the sculpt for that creature. And I was like, wait a minute, that was my idea. You know, I was busy on so many different things. From once I finished the Mystics, I was doing crystal bats, and then those big environmental orange creatures that look like anemones rolling around in the background. And what else did I do? I worked on the mechanism for the Land Strider to shoot the stinger out of his head, and that wound up on the cutting room floor. Unfortunately, nobody ever saw it. You see it without it, and then the next thing you see it with it, and I was like, oh well. And I did puppeteering on The Dying Master with Brian Neal and with Urza, Jen's master, for the Mystics, and then Brian Neal did the Ornamentalist Skeksis, and he's at the banquet scene, and Brian said to me, you know, like, he needs something like so he can pick his teeth. He said, like some really ornamented toothpick. And I said, oh, I know the perfect thing. And I that afternoon I went down to Chinatown in London, and I bought a lacquered chopstick, and then I stuck all these jewels on it. And so there you see him, like he's like very in the movie. It's one shot and then it's gone. But it was such a great idea because it added an element to his character. So, yeah, it was just an incredible experience from beginning to end. It was exhausting. It was 7 days a week, pretty much, 12-hour days, but it was great.
So, but then from Dark Crystal and Muppets, right? Then you got into making
Puppets.
Puppets.
Yeah. Well, then
Puppet.
Fraggle Rock
Oh, right.
came. I went back to work in New York on Fraggle Rock, and I did Uncle Traveling Matt and Jane Gutnick and Ed Christie, and I made all the radio-controlled Fraggles that you see in the opening sequence that are all in the background singing in unison. And we built them all in New York, and Fozzicus, who was head of the technical part of making mechanisms and all that stuff, had worked for Bill Baird and had developed the computer-controlled puppets. And so we were working on these guys, and we had to make them out of very light fleece because they were very weight sensitive. And if you put the eyes too far forward on their head, they wouldn't open their mouth. And if you put it too far back, they would open their mouth and then it wouldn't close. So we had to balance them exactly. And then we couldn't put too much stuff on the top of their head. Like if we did feathers, it had to be more like on the sides and the back or whatever. So we were working on these things for months, and they shot the whole production in Toronto. They got up to Toronto, and the fire station that was 3 blocks away was on the same frequency as the Fraggles. So every time a fire engine went out of the fire station, the radio-controlled Fraggles would just go like this, and they were, and Jim was like, "Oh my God, like, what are we going to do about this?" And Foz said, "We can't do anything about it because I've used every channel, because the Gorgs were on one channel and the Doozers were on another channel because they were all radio controlled." He said, "There aren't any more channels, Jim. Like, we were using them all." And so Jim said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And he said, "We just got to hire a lot of puppeteers to do them." So they hired a whole bunch of Canadian, puppeteers or actors or mimes or whatever, and just taught them on the spot, like to, wiggle their hands in the background. So
funny.
that was crazy. And then towards the end of the first season of Fraggle Rock, I went to Jim and I said, "Jim, we're doing such innovative things with materials, and the toy companies just like, they don't do anything new. It's like the same regurgitated crap all the time. And they'll, like, literally all they do is put a sticker on something and say, 'Oh, this is a Big Bird ride-on,'
Yeah.
And I said, we should really have a development group here in the workshop where we produce new product ideas and pitch them to the toy industry, not let them come to us." And he said to me, "Tim, it's a great idea. I just don't want to do it." And I said, "No." And I was like, I thought he would jump at it, it's like, and so they put a whole bunch of us on freelance because we, there was puppet builders for Sesame Street, there were puppet builders from Muppet Show, there were puppet builders from Muppets on Ice, there were puppet builders from Dark Crystal, and then we had all been working on Fraggle Rock at once, and then Fraggle Rock ended and Jim didn't have anything else coming up immediately. So they put us all on freelance, and permanent freelance. And I said, "What is permanent freelance?" And the guy who was the business manager said, "Well, we're going to call you when we need you." And I said, "Well, okay, fine. I don't think I'm going to sit around and wait for you." So the first thing I did was I was trying to sell new toy designs and inventions unfortunately, the toy industry is incredibly paranoid. And if they don't know you, they won't see you. And the only company that would see me was Hasbro, because I had done the sculpts
That's right.
for Dark Crystal action figure line, which never was produced. But I had some connections with the people at Hasbro, so I could show them concepts and ideas, and I couldn't get them to buy anything that I was doing. So then I went to Toy Fair in New York, and I saw in the back of Toy Fair magazine that there was a company that had represented Rubik for Rubik's Cube, which was called Seven Towns. And they had a New York office. They were based in London. And I called them up, and I explained to the guy, what I wanted to do. And he goes, we don't really see people we don't know. We have a core group of inventors that we work with, blah, blah, blah. We don't know you. And I said, well, how do people get in this industry? Because everybody's telling me you can't. And I said, I spent the last 5 years working at the Muppets. And he went, you worked at Muppets? And I said, yes. He said, okay, you can come in. So then I went in with a whole bunch of puppets. And he said to me, the classic thing, toy companies don't buy puppets. They're not into puppets. And I was like, what? I said, Sesame Street is the most popular television show in the world. Muppet Show was the most popular TV show in the world. And I said, and you guys don't want to do puppets as toy products? And he said, no. And I said, well, all right, I'll come back and I'll show you some other things that I've done. And the first thing I pulled out was this housefly hand puppet that crawled like this. And Larry Mass took one look at it and he goes, we should put an action figure on the back of that and it'll be really cool. And I said, great, let's do it. So then Maureen Trotter, who was working with me back then doing special effects stuff for TV commercials. And I built a whole bunch of these different creatures, and that became Sectaurs, which was sold to Coleco. And then these guys came next. They were originally sold to Coleco as to be a nemesis monster for Sectaurs, but Coleco went bankrupt because of Atom Computers. So then we got the licensing rights back for this guy, and we sold it to Mattel. And then Mattel produced them, and amazingly enough, a hand puppet sold really, really well.
Yeah, right. Now I got a question for you. So these were originally designed as nemesis for the Sectaurs, right?
Yeah.
Design-wise, because we all know what the Boglins look like now. Was there any differences to make it fit into that line?
No, this character, Dwork, is almost identical to the original Boglin that I sculpted and was presented to Mattel. There's really not a lot of change to it, and we created the box, the crate too. So when it was when it was presented to Mattel, it was presented almost identically to what you're seeing right now. The only difference I think was that we didn't have the cross cell on the back, but we had all the warning signs and all that stuff, and the executive at Mattel, which is what sold it, was that he looked at it and he went, oh my God, we're so stupid. He said, this has been staring us in the face in the movie industry, and we never thought about doing this. And, so it was a really big hit. And then I don't know what the hell happened with Mattel. After 2 years, even though they had $7 million in orders going into the third year, they decided to cancel the line. And we were like going, you what? Like, are you crazy? And the head of licensing at Seven Towns in the UK said, fine, give it to me. And he then sold it to Ideal Lacerers, which was a big company in Europe. And Boglins sold for another 8 years. So the biggest following is in the UK and France and some other places in Europe. So it's weird because the first time I did a toy show in the UK, I was sharing booth space because it was expensive for me to get there. And then the booth space was expensive because it was in pounds, not dollars. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to sell a lot of Boglins to recover from this. And I was sharing booth space with another guy who's a toy designer he's like 6'4". He's probably 260 pounds. He's just enormous. His hands are like double the size. And he does little tiny Japanese style tattoo artwork on vinyl. And every time I see him doing it, I go like, I can't believe that somebody this big can paint this tiny little detail on figures that are this big. And he sells out everything. So John Paul is sitting next to me, and after about 10 minutes, he jabs me in the ribs and goes, Tim, what are you doing? Stop talking to everybody so much. I said, wait, what's the matter? He said, all those people in that line over there, they're waiting to meet you and to buy Boglins. I go, huh? I thought it was for the booth next to us. It was selling Japanese toys, because it went out, down the hall, around the corner, and around the edge of the building. God. And then people just kept coming, and I was like, this is amazing. It was amazing. I was like going, oh, I guess they were a lot more popular over here than in the US. So, so now they're back on the market, after me pushing to try and sell them to a major toy company for 5 years. And one of the guys, I worked at Melissa and Doug Toys for many years, designing wooden toys and all their hand puppets and a bunch of other stuff. And one of the guys who was in sales couldn't believe I was working there. When he found that I had done Boglins, because he had Boglins when he was a kid, he goes, Tim, what the hell are you doing here? Like, why aren't you selling Boglins? I'm like, Chris, I've been trying to resell this line for many, many years. I said, I have not gotten a toy company to take it. So then he left working for Melissa and Doug, and he went to work for Jazzwares, and he was trying to get Jazzwares to do Boglins. And they held it for a few months, and then they decided they didn't want to do it. And then he left Jazzwares, and he called me up, and he said, okay, Tim, look it. I just made a lot of money from Jazzwares, and I want to do Boglins. And I said, okay, fine, let's do it. So then I said to him, Chris, you don't have to spend your money. We could do a Kickstarter. It's just that I need somebody on the sales side. I'm good at designing and doing all that stuff, but I'm not good with trying to, find the market for it and marketing it in sales. And he said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. So I didn't know then that Chris had been an executive in the music industry, and he had represented Norah Jones. So he has these like sales contacts, even though it's not directly toys, all over the world. And then from Melissa and Doug, he did all of European sales. So he knew like the potential. And I said, well, we could do a Kickstarter. And he says to me, what's a Kickstarter? And I said, well, you basically, before you start the design and build, you get people to back it so that you're not laying out all this money in front, and then you promise to give them the products as they come out. And then sometimes people just donate money because they want to see the project happen. Mm-hmm. He goes, he like such a classic salesman. He goes, people just give you money for nothing? And I said, yeah, I know it sounds bizarre, but it happens. He said, I said, people will give you small contributions which build up, and he goes, come on, like who's gonna give us money just so we get this done? I said, no, it will happen. So it was supposed to launch on October 30th. And the guy who was running the website made a mistake and had it launch at midnight. Like as soon as it went to like 1 o'clock, 1 minute into the next day, it launched because he had set it up incorrectly. And we woke up the next morning because we said, well, we'll just try and get the tooling costs, because each one of these costs $25,000. So we said, we'll just try and get one made. And by 10 o'clock that morning, we had already raised $25,000. And Chris calls me up and he goes, what the fuck is going on? I said, well, this is what happens if you publicize it well enough and it gets out there. And I had developed a fan base by making handmade Boglins for 4 years before that. And then within 3 days, it hit 75,000, and he calls me up again. He goes, this is amazing, he said. And then we ended up having it run for 3 months, and it raised around $225,000. And then it ended in the middle of December, and then it just kept going. Because you can say, okay, the Kickstarter's over, but if you want to buy additional products, you can. And it ended up hitting close to $300,000. It was like, this is amazing. Then the reality set in of, oh my God, now we got to make the damn thing. So, but luckily there's a company called Four Horsemen who's been doing very high-end action figures. Yeah. And the guy who runs their Chinese production had contacted me before that, and he said, Tim, if you ever want to do anything with like Sectaurs or anything, and you need somebody to help you with production, I know really good, reliable factories. So even though this factory was more expensive because it was the first time we were doing it, we said, fine, we'll pay the extra because we need to know that it can be done. So, I mean, we've had some challenges with quality control because COVID came in, so I wasn't able to fly to China and oversee. So I had to go by photographs of everything, which I never realized how difficult that was going to be until I got in the middle of it. And like they sent me, I just finished doing a whole series of squeeze bots, which are going to be Boglins that are a ball that when you squeeze them, they contort and do different things. And they sent me the paint job, and I'm like, I can't even tell what the hell is going on here. Like, this doesn't look good. Now I got to figure out how to fix it. But doing everything by photograph and judging color in fluorescently lit, I'm like going, oh God, send me more photographs in a different light, because I can't even tell sometimes what the color is, So it's very challenging, right? Whereas I always used to go back and forth to China to see, and the beginning of production and set the standard. We weren't able to do that, and and we're finally getting there, but it's been a real challenge. So,
and the Boglins are back.
And they're back.
And they're back.
They are back, and it's so far it's doing really well, and the Halloween Boglins, well, what was the Halloween Boglins, which is now the Dark Lords, Walmart just doubled their order. So we were like, okay, I guess we're doing something right, We'll see how long it goes. I think the big challenge is if it goes into the second year and it continues to sell. If it doesn't, then, and all these guys who are collectors who back to Kickstarter, well, I don't know if this is as good as the old Boglin and blah, blah, blah. It's different. It's not the same material. The colors are different. I'm like, oh my God. It's like, no, it was never my intention to make exactly the same thing, because then you would be bitching and complaining to me that I was undermining the collector price, So, gotta make a lot of people happy. It's not always easy.
Yeah, but no, listen, time flies. We're having fun. We were at the end of this already.
Yay!
We're at the end of this. But certainly, if you guys want to go buy some Boglins or talk to Tim more, go on over to his table in the last, I don't know what the name of the room is. There's
down this aisle and on the left.
Yes, where Kreskin and John Capodice are and Jeff Klein are in there. So go check out Tim. Thank you guys for coming.
Cavadici.
Cavadici?
Yeah. It's Italian. I went over to him. I said, okay, John, tell me how to pronounce your last name, because I don't want to mangle it.
Yeah, I just did.
Cavadici.
So go check out Tim. And thank you all for joining us
Yes,
at
thank
this.
you for coming.
Thank you.
Sure.
Cool.
You recorded that, right?
I did.
That's something you